In the heart of her own driveway, branded a thief before her neighbors, she refused to let humiliation consume her. Instead, she chose a path of calculated precision, and with a single, deliberate action, she flipped the script on every person who had judged her. It all began on a morning that felt deceptively serene, the kind of morning where the sun cast a warm glow on the rooftops and children's bicycles lay forgotten on the lawns, and the scent of freshly mown grass hung faintly in the air as Tanya Rhodes let her playlist wash over her, the music flowing from her Bluetooth speaker. She was meticulously washing her black Lexus RX in the driveway of her brick home in Brookmead, North Carolina, taking her time. Having the day off from the high school, she found solace in this ritual. Cleaning her car had always been her form of therapy. Soapy suds cascaded down the side mirror as she hummed a familiar tune, one she often played for her students during the stress of exam week. She had earned this car, a testament to 5 years of diligent saving and 3 years of conquering her student loan, and finally, 1 year of permitting herself a touch of luxury. But as she wrung out her microfiber cloth and stepped back to admire its brilliant shine, a shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. Standing on the curb, arms crossed in judgment, was Cheryl Donovan, the neighbor, who possessed an uncanny talent for finding fault with every front yard on the block. Tanya had witnessed her antics many times before. She'd be seen snapping photos of trash bins left out an hour too long, pacing with a clipboard during HOA inspections, and on one occasion, even measuring the height of a neighbor's lawn after a storm. Today, however, there was no clipboard in sight. Instead, she held her phone, its lens aimed directly at Tanya. "Excuse me," Cheryl's voice sliced through the tranquil morning air. "Whose car is that?" Tanya blinked, momentarily bewildered. "It's mine," she replied, drying her hands on a towel. "That's impossible," Cheryl retorted, stepping forward and zooming in with her phone. "That vehicle isn't yours. I know every resident here, and I have never once seen you behind the wheel of it." Tanya's initial impulse was to laugh, assuming it was some bizarre neighborhood joke. She'd witnessed harmless pranks among neighbors before, but the look in Cheryl's eyes was anything but playful. It was pure, unadulterated accusation. "You can't be serious," Tanya said slowly, her brow creasing in disbelief. "Don't you play coy with me," Cheryl snapped back. "I'm contacting the authorities. We don't tolerate strangers stealing property in this neighborhood." A sharp, frustrated breath escaped Tanya's lips. "Strangers? Cheryl, I live right here. 208 Meadow Court. Right there," she gestured to her own front door, the one she had personally painted sage green last spring. Cheryl continued to film. "I've been here for 22 years, and I've never laid eyes on you. That car," she proclaimed, waving her phone, "belongs to the Bensons. They lived 2 houses down before they relocated." Tanya fought to keep her voice even. "The Bensons sold this very car to me 3 years ago." By this point, an audience had gathered. 2 other neighbors emerged, one feigning a dog walk with a leash in hand, the other staring from her porch, arms folded. Tanya felt that familiar, sickening knot tighten in her stomach, the quiet humiliation that washes over you when you become the neighborhood spectacle. "Could you please stop recording me?" Tanya requested, her voice strained. "You're mistaken." But Cheryl was relentless. "If you're so innocent, then you have absolutely nothing to hide." Tanya wiped her damp palms on her jeans, her voice low but unwavering. "If you truly believe I've stolen my own vehicle, then by all means, call whomever you wish. I'll be waiting right here." Mere minutes passed before the wail of a police siren shattered the morning's calm. 2 officers guided their cruiser into the cul-de-sac, rolling slowly toward her driveway. Cheryl frantically waved them over, acting as if she had just cornered a master thief. "There," she declared, pointing a trembling finger. "She's attempting to make off with that Lexus. I have it all on video," she added, as Tanya stood calmly beside her car, arms crossed, while an officer approached, his gaze flickering between the 2 women. "Ma'am, could I please see your license and registration?" Tanya complied, handing them over in silence, as her name perfectly matched the vehicle's documents. Her address corresponded with the very street they were on. Everything was in perfect order. The officer shot Cheryl an exasperated look. "Ma'am, this vehicle belongs to her," he stated flatly. A deep crimson flush crept up Cheryl's face. "No, that's impossible. She hasn't been here long enough to own something like this." Tanya finished for her, tilting her head. "Long enough." Cheryl's mouth hung open, but the words failed her. The officer cleared his throat with an air of finality. "There's no crime being committed here, ma'am. You're free to go about your day." The curtain-twitching neighbors who had gathered began to disperse, some with awkward shuffles, others whispering behind their hands as Cheryl muttered something venomous under her breath. Still gripping her phone like a weapon, she watched as Tanya, without a word, simply retrieved her towel and resumed polishing her car. A slight tremor ran through Tanya's hands, a detail she fought to conceal. In a different world, the incident would have ended right there. But a part of her, a part that had been suppressed for far too long, refused to let this injustice slide. In fact, what Tanya chose to do next would forever alter the fabric of Brookmere and ensure that Cheryl Donovan would never be able to erase the memory of that humiliating morning. Brookmere was not a community known for its disruptions. Lawns were mowed on a strict schedule, neighbors exchanged distant waves, and conversations were kept brief and superficial, especially every Christmas. The Homeowners Association hosted a yearly decorum contest for the most tastefully decorated lawn, an event less about festive joy and more about maintaining pristine appearances. It was all for the neighborhood newsletter, in a place where rumors and speculation spread with more speed than the fastest Wi-Fi connection. And Tanya had been forced to learn that lesson the hard way. She had relocated from Durham 3 years prior, seeking a peaceful existence after her years in the city. The house itself had been a dream come true, slightly over her budget, but the yard was absolutely perfect. Better yet, the local high school was a mere 10-minute drive from her doorstep. What she hadn't realized was that Brookmere operated on a set of rigid, unspoken rules. You were not to repaint your front door without prior approval, your trash bin was to be hidden from view after 6 in the evening, and if you didn't fit the local mold, people made a point to remember it. Tanya was always courteous, offering smiles and greetings to her neighbors, and she had even joined the community gardening club. She brought homemade cookies to the block party during her first summer and offered her time to volunteer during the HOA's annual cleanup initiative. But with every attempt to connect, she felt an invisible barrier, a wall she simply could not breach. And it was people like Cheryl Donovan who made sure that wall remained impenetrable. Cheryl's home was situated just 3 lots away from Tanya's, and she was the self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood. She was the woman who kept Brookmere in order, always seen in pastel cardigans, her front porch remaining spotless. She made it her personal mission to monitor every fallen leaf, every fence post, and every dog leash in her line of sight. While not technically the HOA president, she might as well have been, possessing a voice more commanding than the entire board combined. Tanya vividly recalled her first real encounter with Cheryl. It happened during her second week there, when she had briefly parked her car with its tires just touching the sidewalk while she unloaded her groceries. As if from nowhere, Cheryl materialized, clipboard in hand. "Cars are not permitted to obstruct the pedestrian walkway," she announced, without a hint of a greeting, not even a polite smile. Tanya quickly apologized, moved her car, and assumed the matter was closed. But later that evening, an official email from the HOA landed in her inbox. It began with a so-called friendly reminder about parking, but soon it escalated into a routine of petty notes left in her mailbox, critiquing her recycling bin. Then came the veiled comments on the HOA's Facebook page, targeting people who don't read the rules. Her name was never mentioned, of course, yet the entire neighborhood knew precisely who the target was. Still, Tanya held her composure, trying to convince herself it wasn't a personal attack. Having worked with teenagers for 15 years, she was an expert at handling difficult personalities. But the morning of the car incident, that was a different kind of battle. This wasn't some passive-aggressive post or a cowardly note. This was a public shaming, an accusation that left her exposed on her own driveway. She was surrounded by whispers and silent judgment. By the time she finished drying her car, she could feel the weight of prying eyes watching from behind drawn curtains. Every neighborhood has its curtain twitchers, but Brookmeads were in a league of their own. Tanya attempted to dismiss it, to just let it go. She tried to pretend the morning's confrontation meant nothing, but then her phone buzzed around noon. It was a message from Marcia. Her friend from across the street wrote, "Hey girl, you need to see what Cheryl just posted on the HOA group. She's saying you were in some kind of vehicle dispute. Are you okay?" Tanya's jaw clenched. A vehicle dispute? That was a gross distortion of the truth. She immediately opened the group chat. 68 members, most of whom were silent observers unless someone dared to complain about the pool rules or the landscaper's schedule. But there it was, a fresh post from Cheryl. A reminder to all residents. Please report any and all suspicious activity. We had an incident this morning involving a vehicle and an unidentified individual. The police were called. Let's all stay vigilant. An unidentified individual. Tanya stared at the screen, her chest constricting. Her name wasn't there, but it might as well have been, because everyone in that chat knew exactly who Cheryl was referring to. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Marcia. Don't let her get to you. You did absolutely nothing wrong. Tanya managed a simple thanks in reply, but her mind was already racing. She glanced out the window at her spotless car. It was gleaming under the afternoon sun, the very car that had somehow branded her a suspect on her own property. And all for what? Because someone couldn't fathom that she could own it? That night, as she sat alone on her couch, the silence in her house felt suffocating. Her thoughts drifted to her students, the ones who would come to her office in tears, falsely accused of things they hadn't done. She always gave them the same advice. Stay calm. The facts will prevail in the end. But sitting there, replaying the morning's events in her mind, those words felt hollow and thin. She knew this was far from over, not because she craved drama, but because if she remained silent, Cheryl would feel vindicated. The post would remain, and the whispers would only grow louder, and eventually, everyone would move on. Except for her. But Tanya couldn't possibly have known that the next morning, an event was about to unfold. An event that would escalate this neighborhood tension to an explosive new level and force her to act in a way nobody saw coming. The following morning, Tanya woke before dawn. Sleep had been a stranger, her mind replaying Cheryl's poisonous words on a loop. The air felt unusually cool, and the sky was a washed-out gray, casting a tired, weary light over everything. She made coffee, sat at her kitchen table, and stared at her phone. Cheryl's post was still there, a digital monument to the lie, completely untouched, uncorrected, and worse, it had attracted comments. Unbelievable. I'm glad someone is finally keeping an eye out. People need to stop bringing their trouble into good neighborhoods. This is exactly why we pay our HOA fees, isn't it? Each line was a fresh sting, sharper than the last. Marcia had left a lone comment in her defense. I know Tanya. She has lived here for years. The whispers of reason were drowned out by the rising tide of accusation, and Tanya could feel its chilling embrace. A profound, quiet isolation settled over her, the kind that comes from being judged and condemned without a single soul asking for her truth. She swiped the app away, setting her phone down with a thud. Later that morning, she resolved to seize control of her own story. Stepping into the daylight, phone in hand, she began meticulously photographing her car, the license plate, the registration, every last detail. She didn't have a plan just yet, but she instinctively knew she needed irrefutable proof of her own life. As she worked, a familiar, saccharine voice cut through the air. Well, look who's gathering evidence again. Tanya turned slowly. Cheryl was poised at the edge of her driveway, clad in a pink sweater set and holding a mug that ironically proclaimed Brookmere Strong. Morning, Tanya stated, her voice devoid of warmth. I see you're still around, Cheryl chirped, her eyes flicking to the car. Where else would I be? Tanya retorted. Cheryl's tone was a masterclass in condescension, a sickening sweetness masking pure acid. You know, people are just a little on edge after yesterday. We prefer to keep things peaceful around here. Tanya crossed her arms. Peaceful? You called the authorities on me for washing my own car. I called the authorities because you refused to tell me who you were, Cheryl countered, a defensive edge to her voice. I literally gave you my name and my address, Tanya shot back. You just chose not to believe me. Cheryl's voice tightened. Well, forgive me for being concerned about neighborhood safety. We've had break-ins before, you know. Tanya took a deliberate step forward. You thought I was robbing my own house, from my own driveway? A few doors down, a man watering his lawn conspicuously lowered his hose. He was pretending not to listen, a fact that escaped neither woman. The unspoken audience only made Cheryl stand taller. As if performing for the whole street, Cheryl said sharply, I don't make assumptions, I simply react to what I see. What you saw, Tanya replied, her voice dangerously calm, was a woman washing her car. What you times decided times was something else entirely. A muscle in Cheryl's jaw twitched. Perhaps if you made an effort to introduce yourself, these little misunderstandings wouldn't happen. Or perhaps, Tanya said, her voice now firm and unyielding, people should stop making assumptions about who belongs where. For a long moment, silence reigned. The quiet of the cul-de-sac felt heavy, pressing in on them with a tension you could almost taste. Cheryl finally broke the standoff. Well, I suppose you'll be filing a formal complaint then. Tanya offered a cold smile. I don't need to. You already took care of that for me. Online. She turned and walked back toward her house, her steps measured and deliberate. For the first time, Cheryl stood utterly speechless, no witty comeback at the ready. Inside, Tanya's hands trembled as she placed her phone on the counter. It wasn't anger she felt, not yet. It was a deep, soul-crushing exhaustion from being polite, from pretending that willful ignorance was harmless. She poured another coffee, contemplating her next move. Just around noon, her phone buzzed with an unwelcome notification. This time, it was Principal Warren, her boss. Tanya, is everything all right? I received a rather peculiar email this morning. Someone in your neighborhood sent a video of you with the police yesterday. Her stomach plummeted. A video. Yes, she managed to reply. He continued. They said there was an incident. I told them it was none of the school's concern, but I felt I should give you a heads up. Tanya closed her eyes, the truth crashing down on her. Cheryl had sent it. By the time evening fell, the entire community was buzzing about the car incident, with even parents from her school sending texts cloaked in feigned concern. This had escalated far beyond a simple misunderstanding. It was morphing into a narrative, and in this twisted tale, Tanya was cast as the villain. She stepped out into the twilight as the sun sank below the horizon, the streetlights flickering to life. Cheryl's house remained shrouded in darkness. The only sign of life was the soft, flickering glow from a television screen in the living room. Tanya stood on her own driveway, her gaze fixed upon her car, the very car she had poured so much hard work into. She whispered under her breath, "You wanted attention, Cheryl? Fine." With newfound resolve, she activated her phone's camera. Staring directly into the lens, she began to speak. "My name is Tanya Rhodes. I reside in Brookmead, North Carolina. Yesterday, my neighbor accused me of stealing my very own vehicle. Here is the truth of what transpired." Her voice remained steady, never rising in anger. There were no curses, no insults, only the unvarnished truth, delivered with a calm, clear, and powerful composure. Then, she uploaded the video, completely unaware that by the following morning, its reach would extend far beyond the borders of Brookmead. It was destined to captivate the entire town, with the story spiraling into something she could never have anticipated. By the time the sun rose the next day, Tanya's video had amassed over 10,000 views. She never intended for it to go viral. It was simply her attempt to defend her name, to lay out the facts where insidious whispers could no longer distort them. But the internet operates by its own set of rules. A lesson Brookmead was about to learn firsthand as the video blazed through local Facebook groups. From there, it jumped to Reddit and then TikTok, shared with captions like "HOA gone wild," and she handled that with more grace than anyone could imagine. Its power lay in its lack of theatrics. Tanya's profound calmness, her measured delivery, and the deep exhaustion etched in her eyes struck a collective nerve. Yet, while an online audience was applauding her, the reality on the ground felt distinctly different. That morning, she couldn't help but notice something was amiss. A police cruiser was parked 2 blocks down the street. While patrol cars were a common sight in Brookmead, this one seemed to linger, always present whenever Tanya stepped outside. She could sense it in the corner of her vision. The officers inside made no move to approach. They just sat there, windows rolled up, watching. As she pulled out of her driveway to get some groceries, the cruiser followed, not tailgating, but maintaining a distance just close enough to feel unsettling. Upon her return, Cheryl was once again positioned on her porch, phone in hand, making a poor pretense of texting. Tanya strode over. "Do you have something you'd like to say?" Cheryl glanced up, her tone cold. "I have nothing to say to someone who manufactures drama online." "Drama?" Tanya echoed in disbelief. "You're the one who called the police on me, Cheryl. You filmed it, and then you shared it. I'm the one left to deal with the fallout from your actions. You're the one who made this public," Cheryl retorted. She crossed her arms defiantly. "You could have just let it go." Tanya stared at her, momentarily speechless. "Let it go? You humiliated me in front of our entire neighborhood. You turned a quiet morning into a complete circus. Why on earth would I let that go?" Cheryl's voice grew sharp. "And you think posting that online helps anything? You've made all of Brookmead look like villains. Well, maybe it's time Brookmead took a good look at itself for what it really is." Tanya replied softly, but before Cheryl could offer a comeback, The sound of tires crunching on pavement sliced through the palpable tension. The very same police cruiser from earlier had turned into the cul-de-sac, pulling to a stop directly in front of them. The passenger door swung open, and Officer Ramirez emerged, the very same officer who had responded to Cheryl's initial call. Just 2 days prior, he adjusted his sunglasses, giving a slight nod. "Morning, ladies." With her arms still folded, Tanya acknowledged him. "Morning, officer. Just came by to check in," he announced. Ramirez informed them. "We've been fielding a significant number of calls from this street," as Tanya's eyes drifted pointedly toward Cheryl. When asked from whom, Ramirez let out a weary sigh. "Anonymous complaints mostly, noise disturbances, suspicious activity, nothing of substance. But since your video started making the rounds, people have been a little on edge," he added, prompting Cheryl to jump in. "I haven't called anyone today." "You can check the logs," she insisted. He gave her a look that screamed disbelief. "That's quite all right, ma'am. I'm merely here to remind everyone to keep things civil. Social media can escalate minor issues into major conflicts. And it happens incredibly fast," he concluded. Tanya nodded. "I didn't post it to cause problems. I just wanted people to see what really happened." "I understand that," he conceded. "But be careful. Some people don't appreciate a truth that exposes them." He gave a slight tip of his cap, returned to his cruiser, and drove off, leaving Tanya to process the weight of his warning. Cheryl's voice shattered the silence. "See, even he thinks you've stirred the pot." Tanya turned to face her squarely. "No, Cheryl. What he said was that some people despise being held accountable." For a split second, the color drained from Cheryl's face. Her mouth hung open, but no words came out. That evening, the story broke on the local news. The headline blared: "Neighborhood dispute sparks online outrage in Brookmere." Tanya's name was omitted from the title, but her face was the thumbnail for the entire segment, which played edited clips from her video. It included statements from neighbors, some supportive, others defensive. Cheryl even gave a brief, self-serving interview on her front lawn. She was claiming to have acted purely out of concern for the community's safety. Watching the report from her couch, Tanya felt a knot form in her stomach. Cheryl's voice echoed from the TV. "This has nothing to do with race or anything of that nature. It's about adhering to our neighborhood rules and keeping our community safe. I did what any responsible person would have done." Tanya hit the mute button. "Anyone?" she whispered in disbelief, as her phone began buzzing non-stop with reporters asking for her side of the story. Friends were checking on her, and there was even a message from a civil rights group offering legal support. But one message stood out from the rest. It was from an unknown number. "You have handled yourself with immense grace. Do not stop now. Everyone is watching to see how you respond." She had no idea who the sender was, but the words struck a deep chord. Tanya never wanted to be a symbol or a headline, but she now understood that she possessed something Cheryl had never counted on her having: an audience. And with that audience came influence. What Tanya decided to do with that influence the next day would upend everything. It would leave the entire HOA scrambling in a desperate attempt at damage control. By Friday morning, Tanya's street looked deceptively normal. The lawns were trimmed, flags fluttered in the breeze, but the undercurrent had shifted entirely. People who once waved now deliberately looked away. Cars slowed as they passed her house, the drivers trying to catch a glimpse of the woman from the viral video. At first, Tanya tried to tune it out. She drove to work as if nothing had changed, maintaining her usual calm demeanor with her students. She smiled her way through the day, but at lunch, one of her coworkers gently pulled her aside. "Hey," said Janet Cole, the math teacher with whom she usually shared coffee breaks. "I saw something on Facebook about what's happening in your neighborhood. Are you okay?" Tanya hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired of having to prove things that should never require proof in the first place." Janet sighed. "I understand completely. People live for the drama. Just remember, you did nothing wrong." Tanya offered a faint, grateful smile, though the words failed to convince her as she drove home that evening. She navigated through the heart of Greensboro, where the streets pulsed with the familiar rhythm of the approaching weekend. Seeking a moment of peace, she pulled into Frankie's Grill, a small diner she favored, and settled into a booth by the window, nursing her iced tea. With a hesitant thumb, she scrolled through her phone, bracing herself for the comments on her most recent post. Some were supportive, offering words like, "We stand with you." Others praised her poise. "You handled that with such grace." But the kindness was soured by the cruel accusations. "Maybe she's just desperate for attention, always playing the victim." The words constricted her chest. a stark reminder of how quickly the internet could twist sympathy into suspicion. In an instant, she locked her phone, finished her drink, and headed home as the evening sky bled into deep shades of violet. As she pulled into her driveway, her headlights sliced through the dusk, illuminating something new, a note crudely taped to her mailbox. She froze. It read, "You don't belong here. Leave before things get worse." Her knuckles whitened as her hands clenched the steering wheel. For what felt like an eternity, she sat in silence, the stillness of her street now feeling heavy and menacing. Then, with a surge of resolve, she got out, ripped the note from its place, and strode inside. The tears wouldn't come, not yet. Instead, a different fire took hold. She seized her laptop and opened a blank document. If the world insisted on watching her, she would give them a story they couldn't ignore. That's when the idea crystallized. This wasn't about revenge or getting even. It was about exposure, unfiltered and undeniable. She dialed her cousin, Renee. Renee was a journalist based in Charlotte, one who had dedicated years to covering stories of discrimination and bitter community disputes. "Renee, it's me," Tanya began, fighting to keep the tremor out of her voice. "I need your professional advice. Something has happened here, and it's spiraling." Renee's tone sharpened, instantly alert. "Talk to me. What's going on?" Tanya recounted everything. The false accusation, the viral video, and the note. A weighted pause hung in the air before Renee spoke. "Tanya, this has moved far beyond neighborhood drama. You have documentation, you have witnesses, and you have a video that's already gone viral. This is a story that needs to see the light of day. But I don't want the attention," Tanya confessed softly. "I just want the truth to be on the record." "That's precisely what attention accomplishes," Renee countered. "It makes the truth much harder to bury." They spoke for nearly a full hour, and by the time they hung up, Tanya had a clear and decisive plan. She would force the HOA to be accountable, not by engaging in futile arguments in a comment section, but by confronting them face to face, where her words could not be so easily twisted. That very night, she began to assemble her case, printing out everything: screenshots of the posts, Cheryl's inflammatory video, even messages from the HOA's group chat. Each printed page represented a piece of a disturbing puzzle. She organized them meticulously into a binder, labeling the spine. Incident record, May 2025. She placed it by the door, a silent promise for the morning. The next day, Tanya walked into the HOA office, a nondescript beige building tucked behind the community pool. She requested to speak during the board's open session. Cheryl was already present, seated among the other members, arms crossed with her signature smug confidence. When it was Tanya's turn, she walked to the front, placed the binder firmly on the table, and her voice, though steady, resonated through the quiet room. "On April 27th, I was accused by my neighbor of attempting to steal my own vehicle. That false accusation was recorded. It was then shared and publicly circulated. I was labeled a stranger, an unidentified individual, right here in my own neighborhood. The police confirmed my ownership of the car on the spot, but that fact was ignored, because even with undeniable proof, the harassment did not stop. A few board members shifted in their seats, but Cheryl remained a stone wall, her gaze fixed ahead, refusing to show a single crack. Tanya pressed on, her voice steady. "I have lived in this community for 3 years. I have paid every single fee on time. I have followed every single rule to the letter. And despite all that, I am treated as if I do not belong. So, I will ask you directly, what precisely is your definition of belonging here?" A thick silence fell over the room. She let it hang there, its weight pressing down on each person until, finally, the HOA president cleared his throat. "Miss Rhodes, we will review your concerns and provide a formal response." Tanya offered a cool, measured smile. "Good. I will be waiting. And so will everyone who has already seen what transpired." With that, she gathered her binder with deliberate calm. She turned on her heel and walked out. By Friday morning, Tanya's street looked deceptively the same on the surface. The lawns were manicured, the flags fluttered in the gentle breeze, but the undercurrent had shifted. People who once waved politely now quickly looked away. Cars seemed to crawl past her house, the drivers craning their necks, hoping for a glimpse of the woman from the video. At first, Tanya tried to build a wall around it. She drove to work as if it were any other day, maintaining her usual calm with her students. She smiled her way through the hours, but at lunch, one of her colleagues quietly pulled her aside. "Hey, it was Janet Cole, the math teacher she usually shared coffee breaks with. I saw something online about your neighborhood. Are you all right? Tanya hesitated, then gave a slight nod. Yeah, I'm fine. Just weary of having to prove things that should never be in question. Janet sighed deeply. I get it. People feed on this stuff. Just remember, you've done nothing wrong. Tanya gave a faint, grateful smile, though the words didn't quite settle her unease. On her way home that evening, she passed through downtown Greensboro, where the streets pulsed with their usual end-of-week energy. She pulled into a small diner she liked, Frankie's Grill, and slid into a booth by the window, sipping her iced tea. She scrolled through her phone, bracing herself for the comments on her post. Some were supportive. We're with you. You handled that with absolute grace. But the others were venomous. Maybe she's just craving attention, always trying to play the victim. Her chest grew tight. The internet could sour sympathy into suspicion in a heartbeat, overnight. She locked her phone, finished her drink, and drove home as the sky bled into shades of violet. Pulling into her driveway, her headlights swept across something new, a note taped to her mailbox. She froze, the light illuminating the paper. It read, "You don't belong here. Leave before things get worse." Her hands clenched the steering wheel until her knuckles were white. For a long moment, she just sat there, the stillness of the street feeling heavier, more menacing than ever. Then she got out, ripped the note off, and walked inside. She refused to cry, not yet. Instead, she grabbed her laptop and opened a new document, a fire igniting where fear had been. If people wanted to watch her, she would give them a story they would never forget. That's when the idea crystallized. This wasn't about revenge, not about payback. It was about exposure. Real, undeniable exposure. She called her cousin, Renee. A respected journalist in Charlotte, Renee had spent years investigating stories of discrimination and community conflicts. "Renee, it's me," Tanya began, striving to keep her voice from shaking. "I need your advice. Something happened here, and it's growing." Renee's tone sharpened instantly, becoming alert and focused. "Talk to me. What's going on?" Tanya laid out the entire sequence of events, the accusation, the video, the note. A heavy silence hung in the air. Then, Renee's voice cut through. "Tanya, this has escalated far beyond neighborhood drama. You possess documentation. You have witnesses. A video that has gone viral. This is a story that needs to be brought into the light." "I don't want the attention," Tanya confessed softly. "I simply want the truth on record." "That is precisely what attention achieves," Renee replied. "It makes the truth much harder to bury." Their conversation stretched for nearly an hour. By the end of the call, Tanya had formulated a plan. She was going to hold the HOA accountable, not by squabbling in a comment section, but by confronting them face to face, where her words could not be twisted. That evening, she printed out everything. Screenshots, social media posts, Cheryl's video, and even the HOA group chat logs. Each sheet of paper represented a piece of the puzzle. She arranged them neatly within a binder, labeled it Incident Record, May 2025, and positioned it by the door. The next morning, Tanya arrived at the HOA office, a nondescript beige building situated behind the community pool, and requested to speak during the board's open session. Cheryl was already present, sitting among the members with her arms folded and an air of her usual smug confidence. When Tanya's turn arrived, she stood before the group and placed the binder on the table. Her voice was steady, yet it carried with authority through the room. On April 27th, I was accused by my neighbor of stealing my own car. That accusation was recorded, shared, and publicly circulated. I was referred to as a stranger and an unidentified individual within my own neighborhood. The police verified my ownership immediately, but that was insufficient, because even after presenting proof, the harassment did not cease. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Cheryl stared straight ahead, affecting an unbothered facade. Tanya continued, "I have lived here for 3 years. I have paid every HOA fee on time. I have followed every single rule. And yet, I am treated as though I do not belong. So, this is my question. What exactly does belonging mean in this community?" Silence. She let it linger in the air, its significance pressing down on every person in the room. Finally, the HOA president cleared his throat. "Miss Rhodes, we will review your concerns and respond in a formal capacity." Tanya smiled politely. "Good. I will be waiting, and so will everyone else who has already seen what happened." Then, she gathered her binder, turned, and walked out. Outside, The afternoon sun touched her face for what felt like the first time in days. She felt something shift deep inside her, not peace, not relief, but a newfound resolve. But she had not yet realized that Cheryl was not finished. That night, Cheryl would make one final move, and this time, Tanya would answer in a way that no one could possibly ignore. That evening, Tanya sat in her living room, the faint whir of the ceiling fan blending with the low hum of her refrigerator. She had done everything correctly. She had followed the proper channels. She had spoken calmly and kept her dignity intact. Yet, deep down, she knew it would not be enough. Brookmere was the kind of place where gossip wielded more power than truth. The next morning, she would be back at square one. Cheryl would be smiling for the cameras again. Neighbors would pretend to know nothing, and the HOA would brush it all aside. But then her phone pinged. A notification materialized from an unfamiliar account, Brookmere Watch, followed by a message. "You should see what Cheryl's posting now." Her stomach tightened. She clicked the link. There it was, a grainy, zoomed-in photo of Tanya, snapped from across the street and posted a mere hour ago, with a caption that dripped with insinuation, "Suspicious activity continues. Neighbors should remain alert." It had already gathered 5 comments. "See? She's still making trouble. Why hasn't the HOA dealt with her?" I knew this wasn't finished. Tanya just stared at the screen, a cold disbelief washing over her. Cheryl had fabricated a fake neighborhood account, masquerading as a community watch page, all to keep her poisonous narrative alive. That was the final straw. She set her phone down, rose to her feet, and whispered with chilling resolve, "All right, Cheryl, you want a show? Let's give you a real one." The idea struck her like a bolt of lightning, swift, dangerous, but crystal clear. She was done with petty online arguments. It was time to pull back the curtain on the entire charade. She flipped open her laptop and logged into Facebook. She created a new group, Brookmere Truth. Her first post was a simple, powerful invitation. If you've ever been targeted, silenced, or humiliated by this HOA, this is your space. Share your story. Within minutes, 2 people had joined, then 5, then 20. By morning, there were over 100 members, and the posts began to flood in tales of unjust fines, warnings for the most trivial issues, and a blatant, selective enforcement of the rules. One woman wrote, "They told me my son's car was too loud, even though other teenagers have the exact same model. When I complained, they just called me defensive." Another person chimed in, "They fined me for unaesthetic patio furniture, yet Cheryl has a flock of plastic flamingos on her lawn." Every story pointed back to the same small clique. The same toxic pattern of control, humiliation, and favoritism emerged, and Cheryl's name appeared again and again. Tanya read every single post, her pulse hammering in her chest as the silent rage she'd swallowed all week transformed into a sharp, focused clarity. This was no longer just about her. That afternoon, she called Renee again. "Remember that story you said needed to see the light of day?" Tanya asked. Renee's tone immediately sharpened. "Yeah? Well," Tanya replied, "it's about to get it." Renee promised a local TV crew would be there the next morning. Tanya didn't hold back. She told them everything, not just her own ordeal. She detailed the systemic pattern of abuse throughout Brookmere, even providing screenshots from Cheryl's fake Brookmere Watch account. By evening, the story was on the air, broadcast on WSOC Channel 9 under a damning headline. "Homeowner exposes HOA harassment pattern in Greensboro subdivision." The segment was brief, but its impact was immense. It showed footage of Tanya, speaking with calm conviction on her porch, interwoven with clips of neighbors confirming they too had been targeted. The news anchor noted that the HOA was now under review for potential misconduct. When Cheryl saw the broadcast, she absolutely erupted. The next morning, she stormed up Tanya's driveway, radiating fury. "You had no right to do that!" she shrieked, her voice trembling with rage. "You're destroying our community's reputation." But Tanya was prepared. She had her phone recording before Cheryl even set foot on her property. "I didn't ruin a thing," Tanya replied, her voice perfectly steady. "I just told the truth." Cheryl's eyes darted to the phone in Tanya's hand. "Turn that off right now." "No," Tanya said coolly. "You enjoy recording people, don't you? Remember?" Cheryl's face flushed a deep crimson. She lunged, snatching for the phone, but Tanya sidestepped the advance just in time. The sudden movement triggered the automatic porch light, bathing both women in a harsh, clinical glare. "Touch me again," Tanya said, her her voice dangerously quiet. And this recording goes directly to the police. For a split second, Cheryl froze, the rage in her eyes flickering and giving way to something else. Raw fear. Then, she spun around and stomped away, muttering a stream of curses under her breath. Tanya slowly lowered her phone. Though her hands trembled, her face was a mask of resolve. That video, the one she captured with stoic silence, was destined to be the final blow to Cheryl's reign. By nightfall, it had gone viral. Cheryl, screaming and lunging, her voice splintering with rage, while Tanya remained an island of calm composure. The following day, Cheryl's online presence vanished. Her position on the HOA was immediately suspended pending a formal investigation, and for the first time in 3 long years, Tanya walked her street not feeling diminished. The averted gazes were gone. In their place were hesitant smiles from neighbors uncertain how to face her after witnessing the truth unfold. But their opinions held no weight for her. She hadn't sought approval, only respect. Little did Tanya know, however, that the HOA board's next meeting was about to unearth something far deeper, a truth that would shatter the neighborhood's pristine image of itself, right to its very core. By the next morning, the whispers in Brookmere had escalated into a full-blown firestorm. The community was unraveling from within, as Tanya's second video, the one capturing Cheryl's aggressive lunge toward her, had spread with even greater velocity than the first. Local news outlets seized upon it, followed swiftly by regional network. A neighborhood that once boasted of its tranquility was now notorious, a headline for all the most scandalous reasons. The HOA board scrambled, calling an emergency meeting. Flyers were hastily taped to mailboxes, and urgent emails implored residents to maintain order and to refrain from public speculation. But the dam had already broken. Tanya, for her part, had no intention of attending that meeting. She felt she had made her statement. Yet, when Marcia appeared at her doorstep that afternoon, a seed of doubt was planted. Tanya hesitated. "You have to come," Marcia insisted, her voice low. "They're already twisting the narrative, claiming you doctored the videos, that it's all taken out of context." Tanya let out a slow, cynical breath. "Of course they are. People believe you, Tanya." Marcia pressed on, "But they need to see you in that room." And so, she went. The community center was packed, row after row of folding chairs occupied by residents, many of whom typically shied away from any hint of confrontation. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and palpable tension. At the front, 5 board members were arrayed behind a long table. Cheryl was present too, seated apart, arms crossed, hiding behind sunglasses indoors. The moment Tanya walked in, heads swiveled in her direction, conversations dissolving into hushed whispers. She didn't falter, striding purposefully to the back. She took a seat and waited. The HOA president, Howard Briggs, cleared his throat, the sound echoing in the silence. "Thank you all for coming. We are gathered to address the recent events and the misinformation circulating online that has, unfortunately, cast our community in an unfavorable light." A wave of murmurs swept through the room, but Tanya remained perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap. Howard forged ahead. "We want to assure all residents that this board takes every accusation with the utmost seriousness. Mrs. Donovan," he gestured toward Cheryl, "has served this community with unwavering dedication for years. We find the current narrative to be profoundly unfair and entirely one-sided." A few heads nodded in agreement, while others frowned in dissent. Then, a man from 2 streets over rose to his feet. He was gray-haired, wearing a baseball cap. "With all due respect, sir," he began, his voice clear, "I've seen those videos. There was no editing. Cheryl was completely out of line. If this is the face we're showing of Brookmere, then perhaps we have the wrong people in charge." The room erupted in a low rumble of consensus, and Cheryl's lips pressed into a thin, hard line. Howard desperately tried to regain control. "Sir, please," but another voice sliced through the noise. "No, he's absolutely right," affirmed Angela Ruiz, one of the homeowners from Tanya's Facebook group. "I've been a resident here for 7 years, and I've received fines for things no one else ever gets cited for. Cheryl just claimed it was because I failed to read the guideline. It's the same narrative every single time. Rules for some, but exceptions for others." As the murmurs in the room swelled, Cheryl finally rose to her feet, her voice sliced through the tension. "You have no idea what you are talking about. I have dedicated my entire life to keeping this neighborhood respectable. If some people are incapable of handling a little structure, then perhaps they simply don't belong in Brookmere. That final sentence landed like a slap across the face of the room. Tanya stood up. "Say that one more time." The crowd went silent. Cheryl froze as Tanya began a slow walk to the front of the room. Her eyes were locked onto Cheryl. "You have spent weeks labeling me as suspicious, dangerous, and untrustworthy. And now you're suggesting people like me don't belong? You do realize everyone in this room just heard you say that." Cheryl's mouth fell open, but the words wouldn't come. Tanya shifted her focus to the board. "You said you take accusations seriously, so here is mine. This board has sanctioned discrimination. It has been hiding behind bylaws for years, and it's not just me. It's anyone who doesn't fit your narrow vision of what Brookmere is supposed to look like." A few residents clapped softly, and then more voices joined the applause. Howard tried to restore order, but the power in the room had shifted completely. People began to voice their own complaints right then and there. Unjust landscaping fees, neglected maintenance requests, and blatant double standards on property inspection. The board was completely unable to keep up. Within an hour, what was intended to be a controlled meeting had transformed into a full-scale reckoning. Cheryl departed halfway through, slamming the door forcefully on her way out. By that evening, the HOA group chat, which was once silent except for reminders about trash bins and community barbecues, was flooded with impassioned demands for change. Marcia texted Tanya later that night, "They're holding a vote next week. Cheryl's position might actually be revoked." Tanya didn't smile. She just stared at the screen for a long time. The feeling wasn't satisfaction. It was exhaustion. She had never wanted to ruin anyone. She had only wanted peace. But peace, she was now realizing, doesn't grow from silence. The following morning, she went for a walk. It was early, the sky still pale with the light of dawn. A few neighbors offered tentative, unsure waves, but this time, their gestures felt real, not merely polite or performative. When she arrived back home, a note was taped to her door. Her heart skipped a beat, but this one was different. It simply read, "Thank you for standing up. Some of us were scared too, but you gave us courage." Tanya held the piece of paper in her hand, her throat tightening for the first time since this whole ordeal had started. She allowed herself a small, genuine smile. But just as Brookmere was beginning to feel a sense of calm, the HOA's internal review uncovered something even more disturbing. And it was about to show everyone that Cheryl's behavior was only the tip of the iceberg. The HOA's internal review began quietly, a mere formality according to Howard Briggs. Standard procedure, he had told residents in an email, though everyone knew it was simply damage control. But within a single week, standard procedure had escalated into something the board could no longer contain. A handful of residents had started demanding total transparency. They wanted to see all of the HOA's correspondence, the warnings, the fines, the citations. They wanted numbers, names, and exact dates. Howard hesitated at first, but the pressure became too immense for the board to withstand. After much resistance, they produced copies of complaints from the past 2 years, and the evidence was undeniable, laid out in black and white. The pattern was glaringly obvious. Out of nearly 80 written warnings issued by the HOA, over 60 were directed at a mere 7 households. Every single one of them was either a person of color or a family that had moved into the neighborhood within the last 3 years. The infractions cited were utterly trivial. A lawn deemed too dry, a fence supposedly too high, children playing too loudly. Some fines were even doubled without any justification, and at the bottom of every one of those notices, the same 2 initials were inscribed. CD, Cheryl Donovan. Tanya sat at her dining table, scrolling through the leaked documents on her tablet as her phone buzzed relentlessly with messages from her neighbors. One read, "I just discovered Cheryl fined me for an unapproved mailbox design, the very one the HOA provided." Another lamented, "She reported me for having an unauthorized gathering. It was my child's birthday party. They're threatening to revoke my pool access because my cousin visits too often." The more Tanya read, the clearer the picture became. This was never just about her car. It was about control, about one woman's quiet reign of authority that had been left unchecked for far too long. Marcia called that evening, her voice electric with urgency. "They have reporters camped outside Cheryl's house, but she's refusing to comment." Tanya rubbed her forehead, whispering, "I never wanted it to go this far." "I know," Marcia replied, "but perhaps it needed to. Meanwhile, the HOA board was desperately scrambling to distance itself from the fallout. Howard released a public statement, asserting that the board had no knowledge whatsoever of any individual misconduct. He claimed the association was wholly committed to fairness, but very few believed him. The following week, a special meeting was officially scheduled. This meeting, however, would be open to all residents and the press. Tanya had no intention of speaking. She'd endured enough confrontation to last a lifetime. But then Renee, her cousin, called that morning. "Don't you dare miss it," Renee insisted firmly. "People are going to be watching. This isn't just your story anymore," she added. "It's everyone's." When Tanya arrived, the parking lot outside the community center was overflowing. Local news vans lined the curb, their cables snaking across the pavement. Inside, the atmosphere was absolutely electric. It was a tense mixture of anger, shame, and raw anticipation. Howard sat at the head of the table, beads of sweat forming on his temple. Cheryl, notably, was absent. The meeting commenced with the usual formalities, but no one in the room cared about the agenda. Hands shot up across the room, one after another, as voices began to overlap, their pent-up frustration finally spilling into the open. "I want to know why I was fined for my patio furniture, when Cheryl's own yard looked like a rummage sale," another shouted. "She came to my house just to take pictures of my husband washing our truck. She reported my teenage daughter for walking home too late from practice." With each testimony, the weight in the room grew heavier. Tanya remained silent, absorbing it all. Then, a woman stood up near the back of the room, someone Tanya didn't recognize. She introduced herself as Deborah Lynn. She was a retired teacher who had lived in Brookmere since the very first homes were built. "I was here when this community was founded," she began, her voice steady. "And it was supposed to be about togetherness, not about control. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. We allowed one person's fear to dictate who belonged here." The room fell silent. Deborah then turned her gaze toward Tanya. "You reminded us all what courage looks like. You didn't scream, you didn't lash out, you simply stood your ground, and in doing so, you woke everyone else up." Tanya felt a lump forming in her throat. She never expected anyone to articulate that so publicly. Howard finally cleared his throat, his voice strained. "Mrs. Donovan has resigned her position, effective immediately. A new board election will be held next month." A few people began to clap, cautiously at first. His voice rising with conviction, Howard declared, "We will also be commissioning an independent audit of all HOA procedures and re-examining every past complaint. We owe our residents far better." Tanya finally let out a breath, a wave of relief washing over her for the first time in weeks. The room's cacophony softened into a gentle murmur, a blend of voices, talking, laughing, and perhaps even beginning to heal. Once the meeting adjourned, a steady stream of neighbors made their way toward her. Some came to offer their apologies. Others voiced their gratitude, while a few simply offered a firm handshake, their expressions conveying what words could not. As Tanya stepped out into the fading evening light, she saw the news cameras were still active. Reporters shouted her name, desperate for a statement as she paused, gathering her thought. Then, she spoke softly, "All I ever wanted was to live in peace. Maybe now, we can all finally start to do that." That very clip would air later that night, playing over montages of families, walking dogs, children riding bikes, and porch lights flickering to life. It was the same neighborhood, yet it was fundamentally changed. But peace in Brookmere was not an instantaneous victory. For some, the truth was a difficult reality to accept. And for Tanya, it was time to decide what to do with the hard-won respect she had finally earned, whether to let the dust settle, or to fight to make sure the change was permanent. 2 weeks after the public meeting, Brookmere felt profoundly quieter, but it was not the oppressive silence born of fear. It was a pause, a community taking a collective breath now that the storm had passed. Everyone was cautiously looking around, taking stock of what remained. The HOA office became a hive of activity for days. In the wake of Cheryl's resignation, residents stopped by to review their case files, some to demand refunds, and others just to see the validation that their complaints had been legitimate all along. The new interim president, Angela Ruiz, worked relentlessly to rebuild trust. As for Tanya, she did her best to retreat from the spotlight, and eventually, the persistent calls from the media ceased. The news vans had vanished, and for the first time in weeks, she could walk outside without someone instantly pointing a phone in her direction. She even began tending to her garden again, a simple joy she'd abandoned after Cheryl's incessant violation notices. Regarding approved plant colors, she knelt in the rich soil one Saturday morning, carefully planting vibrant marigolds along the walkway. The sun felt warm on her shoulders, and for the first time in a very long while, she no longer felt the chilling weight of being watched. Masha stopped by, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You're getting quite a reputation for these flowers," she teased, and Tanya laughed softly. "Well, I suppose it's safer than washing my car." They shared a comfortable silence, sipping coffee and gazing out at the tranquil street. A couple of kids were playing catch on the corner. The neighborhood looked almost normal again. "Do you ever think Cheryl might apologize?" Marcia asked. Tanya hesitated for a moment. "Perhaps," she replied, "but I don't require her to." Marcia tilted her head. "Are you sure?" Tanya nodded slowly. "People like her don't apologize, because in their own minds, they're never wrong. But she lost her power," Tanya concluded, "and that is apology enough." Later that night, as the sun dipped low, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find a teenage girl standing anxiously on the porch. It was Leah, Cheryl's granddaughter. "Hi, Miss Rhodes," she said quietly. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Tanya simply nodded and stepped aside, letting her in. Leah lingered just inside the doorway, clutching the strap of her backpack tightly. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she clarified, "for what my grandma did. She told me her version of events, but after I watched the videos, her voice trembled slightly. She was wrong." Tanya felt a tightness in her chest, disarmed by the girl's raw sincerity. "You don't have to apologize on her behalf," Tanya said softly. "I know," Leah replied, "but I want to. She doesn't listen to a soul, and I couldn't stand you thinking everyone in my family is like that." Tanya offered a gentle smile. "I don't. It took real courage to come here, Leah. You did the right thing." The girl nodded. Visibly relieved, she turned to leave when Tanya called out, "Hey, your grandma is going to have an abundance of time to think. Maybe one day she'll finally understand what you already do." After Leah had gone, Tanya sat in the quiet stillness of her living room. The evening light spilled across the floor, and for the first time since that day in the driveway, she felt a strange fusion of exhaustion and peace. The following week, the HOA board publicly announced its new policy changes. From now on, every complaint would be reviewed. It would be by multiple members, not just one. Anonymous reports would no longer be considered, and diversity training was implemented. Mandatory sessions were added for all board members. It was far from a perfect fix, but it was a start. On Sunday, Tanya attended her first community barbecue. It was the first since moving in. For once, her arrival was met not with whispers, but with waves and smiles. Some even joked about the video that went viral. Music started to play, and a few neighbors offered her a plate of food. Before she could even ask, Howard approached her tentatively, holding a cup of lemonade. "Miss Rhodes," he said. His voice was awkward, yet sincere. "I want to express my thanks for how you handled all of this. You could have made it incredibly ugly, but you chose not to." Tanya gave a faint smile. "It got ugly all on its own. I just stopped pretending it wasn't." He nodded slowly. "Still, you've changed things here, and for the better." She glanced around the park. Families were laughing, kids were running through sprinklers, and the air was light with conversation. "Maybe," she said quietly, "I just hope people remember this when the next problem arises." As the sun began to set behind the rooftops, Tanya walked home, the sound of laughter fading into the distance. She paused by her car, the very same Lexus that had ignited everything. She ran her hand along the door, now spotless and reflecting the glow of the evening sky. For once, it didn't conjure feelings of accusation or anger. It just looked like what it had always been, something she had worked for, something she had earned. She smiled, locked it, and headed inside. Peace wasn't about forgetting. It was about reclaiming what others tried to steal away. Your right to belong, your right to breathe. But Tanya wasn't just walking away from the conflict. That night, she was walking toward something new, something that would transform her personal stand into a message that would reach far beyond Brookmere. In the weeks that followed, Tanya's life slowly returned to a state that felt close to normal. But it was not the same kind of normal she had known before. This time, she walked through Brookmere with her head held a little higher. Her pace was a little slower, her presence fully established. People greeted her differently now, the same neighbors who once averted their eyes. They began stopping to chat, asking how she was, even offering to help with her garden. Some of it was guilt, she could tell, but most of it felt genuine. Real understanding had begun to blossom where only silence used to grow. The HOA moved forward under new leadership. The policies Tanya had insisted upon in that meeting were being implemented, one by one. They implemented transparency reports, public complaint logs, and term limits for board members' new rules to ensure that no single individual could ever again wield the kind of unchecked authority Cheryl once had. As for Cheryl, she moved out quietly 2 months later. There was no grand announcement, no farewell post, just a moving truck one Saturday morning before the neighborhood had stirred. When Tanya stepped outside and saw the empty porch across the street, she didn't feel a sense of satisfaction. It was simply release. The cycle had ended. But change, she knew, doesn't stop at property lines. A few weeks after Cheryl's departure, Tanya received an invitation in her email. It was from a local university that hosted an annual forum on community relations and bias in housing. They wanted her to be a speaker. Her first instinct was to decline. She told herself she wasn't an activist. She was just a school counselor who wanted peace in her own neighborhood. But as she read the message a second time, she realized that her ordinariness might be the very reason they had asked her. It was because she represented every person who had ever been forced to stay calm while being humiliated, who had chosen grace when anger might have been so much easier. So, she agreed. On the day of the forum, Tanya stood behind a wooden podium in a modest lecture hall at Guildford College. Dozens of faces watched her. Students, professors, homeowners, and even a few reporters who remembered her name. She began simply, 3 months ago, I was accused of stealing my own car, she said. What followed wasn't merely a misunderstanding. It was about the kind of quiet prejudice that thrives in plain sight, the kind that smiles to your face and waves from across the street, and still finds a way to remind you that you don't belong. The room remained silent, listening intently. I could have shouted back. I could have let my anger loose, and some people would have said I had every right to, but that's not who I am. I decided to fight differently by staying calm, by presenting proof, by letting her own words expose the truth. She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. Some people told me I was brave. I wasn't. I was tired. Tired of watching people like me be disrespected and then told to just move on. But what I learned is that staying silent doesn't keep the peace. It protects the problem. And when you finally decide to stand up, even in the smallest way, that is the moment things begin to change. A few people nodded. Others scribbled in their notebook. Tanya continued. Brookmere changed because people stopped pretending, because neighbors finally looked at each other instead of looking away. And that's what accountability truly is. It's seeing someone's humanity and admitting where we went wrong. When she finished, the audience applauded softly, not the loud, performative kind, but the genuine kind that lingers. Afterward, several attendees approached to thank her. One woman, a teacher from another county, said, "Your story reminded me why I can't afford to stay quiet at my own job." Driving home that evening, Tanya rolled her window down and let the cool air fill the car. The highway stretched ahead, long and open, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel small. She wasn't just Tanya Rhodes from Brookmere anymore. She was the woman who changed how an entire community saw itself. As she pulled into her driveway, she glanced at her car. The same black Lexus RX was gleaming under the porch light, but it no longer signified a brewing storm. It felt like a quiet, hard-won victory. A victory that was both earned and permanent. She walked inside, took a seat, and opened her laptop. The Brookmere Truth Group was still very much alive, but it was calmer now, filled mostly with updates, small triumphs, and positive exchanges between neighbors who had once deliberately avoided one another. She typed a short post. Change doesn't begin with anger. It begins when we refuse to accept disrespect as normal. Don't wait for permission to stand your ground. Be your own proof. She hit post, leaned back in her chair, and smiled. Tanya's story was never about revenge or public exposure. It was about reclaiming her peace, and in doing so, giving others the courage to reclaim theirs. So, if you are watching this and thinking about that single moment when someone made you feel insignificant, remember Tanya. Remember how she stood there in her driveway, facing an accusation of theft, and responded not with rage, but with unwavering truth. Because sometimes the most powerful action you can take is to stay composed, stand tall, and force the world to see you as you are, with no explanations required. If this story moved you, Don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that remind us what dignity, courage, and grace look like in the course of everyday life. And always, always remember, your truth matters far more than their assumption.